A very familiar face is joining us now, CoinDesk Executive Director of Global Content, Emily Parker. Emily, where have you been?
I missed you guys. It's great to see you back. I
don't know what Jen's talking
places.
about. I've been waiting for this segment for weeks.
That's better, Lawrence. Yeah. Weeks and weeks. I've been kind of all over Asia. Well, not just I especially was speaking at events in Seoul, Singapore, and Hong Kong. There were big fintech events in Hong Kong and Singapore specifically, and I was also speaking at an event in Korea.
Well, Emily, we got the first question that comes to mind is, what's the reaction people are having to this Binance news? You haven't been here for so long. Of course, we've seen what's happened with Binance. CZ has stepped down as CEO. What's the reaction been like in Asia?
So I was back in the US when this news broke, but I mean, I think in general, the reaction in the crypto industry is kind of mixed, right? I mean, I think there's some people that see this as like the beginning of a new era. A lot of people are pointing out that Binance is not in fact dead. In fact, it just kind of has new leadership, and it has, leadership that has kind of a regulatory background. So I think there are some people that are positive about this new era for Binance. Of course, there are others who think that, this is an example of US overreach and that the US was targeting Binance specifically because it was crypto. So, I think as usual, the crypto industry doesn't really agree exactly on this.
Can't believe it. You're saying that the RIP borderless crypto, is that what you think is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the interesting larger trends here. So I would argue that it's very unlikely that we will ever see a massive company like the old Binance, because Binance was a very unique animal, as we know from the show, right? We talked to a lot of people about Binance. We talked to Binance. Binance's whole thing was like, nobody really knows where they are. They're kind of everywhere and nowhere. The whole idea of a headquarters was sort of antithetical to Binance's whole identity. CZ famously didn't really like questions about like where he was based, where the company was based, where the headquarters were. That was a big part of Binance's whole thing. And I would argue that that era is over, at least for a company at the scale of Binance. I mean, I think that's very, very clearly the message that the US wanted to send. But I don't think it's just the US. I think, we're just seeing, again, a lot of countries and just trying to establish very clear regulatory regimes and clear jurisdictions. And I just don't know if we're going to ever see like a huge company like that that's just kind of like in this nebulous area where we don't really know where they're based.
Is that because, for the most part, Binance was sort of in the acceptable world, if you will? I mean, we have China, UAE, the United States. These are places that have some regulations, some more than others. But at the same time, we look at maybe some other actors, Iran, Russia, etc., North Korea, which might say, you know what, it'd be really cool if we set up an exchange and we kind of control it, but not really, and let it, take a lot of this volume. Could we see a global company, if you will, go to that size again and that kind of influence, based somewhere
I think
that's hard to reach?
I mean, I think if you ask US officials, I think it's quite unlikely, right? I mean, look, I think Binance, like, to its credit, it established a very different kind of model. I mean, it was a really unique company, right? I mean, when it formed, and I think people didn't really know what to do with it. And so for a while, it was in a little bit of a gray area. I think the US has very clearly said that they are just not interested in this kind of thing anymore. And, we're actually seeing some moves. Our colleague Jesse Hamilton just reported that, the Treasury, US Treasury is actually pushing for expanded powers to sort of go after, illicit finance using crypto. And they're looking for, special jurisdiction over non-US stablecoin issuers. And, they're looking for expanded powers that would involve transactions that don't even involve US citizens. So I don't see, the US stepping down. If anything, I think they're pushing for expanded powers. Obviously, this is quite controversial. There are people in the crypto industry who think this is really bad for decentralized finance, for example. They think that the US is maybe going too far. But I just think that we're trending away from this idea of a borderless decentralized company.
Where does the industry go from here? We know you've been at a lot of think tank events. Do you think we're going to see innovation move more towards Hong Kong and the United Arab Emirates that have, more clear regulatory structures than we do over here in the US? Do you think international regulators are going to start opening their investigations into Binance and firms like that? What are folks saying out there?
So I do think that, in the near term, we are trending towards jurisdictions that have regulatory clarity, and I think that's where, Singapore obviously has had an advantage for a long time. I think Hong Kong is establishing, more regulatory clarity. The thing to remember here is that regulatory clarity is not the same thing as ease of doing business. These are actually quite difficult places to do crypto business. But I think one other trend that I saw a lot in Asia is, this trend towards, real world asset tokenization. And, again, this sort of split between, digital asset tokenization and crypto, which I think some governments are trying to kind of are trying to distinguish that difference.
And just based on your time in Asia, I always got to ask about Web3 gaming. It's something that I love to follow, and Emily, I know you do too. Some data that we recently reported on the show said I think 40% of game developers are in the Asia Pacific region. And what kind of innovation were you seeing while you're over there?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is something, Jen, we need to dig in further. I mean, this is clearly a very big narrative and something that you hear a lot. I think that there is a little bit more energy for Web3 gaming in Asia versus the United States. I think there's a little, again, speaking very generally here, but there's, we've talked about this before on the show, there's a little bit of a backlash towards Web3 gaming among some in the gaming community in the United States. And I think in Asia, it's a little bit less so. So definitely like some of the big players that are emerging, for example, are Korea, Japan, a lot of the big companies are expanding quite aggressively into Web3 gaming. There isn't so much of a stigma about it within those local gaming communities, which I think gives companies a little bit more of a wider breadth to explore that.
All right, Emily, we are going to have to wrap it there. Thanks so much for making an appearance. We look forward to welcoming you back to the show full-time soon.